So, very excited to be here and sharing the screen with the lovely Natal. Thank you for joining us. So, for the next 45 minutes, we are going to be talking all about embracing agility, so transforming L&D for the future of work. So, huge, warm welcome to Natal. Thank you for joining us. And congratulations on your latest book, one I have a well-worn version here. Oh, I've got a thing on my screen. It's not working for you now. If you haven't read it already, it is fantastic. I was just talking about how I've basically turned down every corner of every page to come back to, which isn't that helpful to me, but actually means that the book is incredibly useful, and I keep going back to it and using it. So congratulations on your book. This is very exciting. This feels a little bit serendipitous to me, Natal, because when I first started at Hive, I don't know if you're aware of this, it actually comes out in your book a little bit, but not mentioned as Hive, is I met Tracy Waters, who is a massive advocate of agile HR and yourself and working with yourself. And I first met her as one of my first customers, and she really taught me about what agile L&D is, what it means to put it into practice, what some of the challenges are, what the processes are to get going. And so it feels it's really exciting for me that I learned so much from that experience that helped me to build a better product business going forward, that the kind of serendipitous circle of coming back 8 years later to be hosting this webinar with yourself, talking about agile HR, and we only met properly maybe 6 months, a year ago now.
Yes.
But actually you've been impacting how I personally work for more than 6-7 years now. So super excited to have you here and to talk to you a bit more about your next book. So the first book is Agile HR. If you haven't read it, this is Agile L&D. But I'm sure our guests would love to hear a bit about yourself and the journey and experience you've been on, and how you've got to writing this book. And so please do share your journey, Natal.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's lovely to be here, and it's so nice to have that kind of, as you said, the circle come back around, or the agile cycle, perhaps. Um, and your story, I think, is quite meaningful, because that actually was also right at the start of when I started to do a lot of meetups around HR agility. And I also met Tracy Waters, and she was one of the first people that was applying these ways of working to particularly an L&D environment, but then sort of got bigger into sort of the whole people experience. And what was interesting is that what led to that was, I, like many people on this call, have done, did in-house HR for a number of years. And I left a particular role a little bit disheartened with what felt like process before people. I always joke about this. We were using a 25 box talent matrix, and, I was overwhelmed by boxes, kind of thing. And thought, hang on, it's not about the boxes. It's about, what we're trying to do with the matrix. And so I went and worked with an organization, one of my first consulting projects, where they were agile through and through, and they were now a very successful business. And they were a startup that then scaled. And I was challenged to work really differently. And in particular, I learnt the power of applying agile methods to co-create change. And I went, oh, I think this is what I've been looking for. I'm looking for practices that are already known by the business. It's not a separate HR thing. But actually, it allows me to build change with people and not implement it onto people. And I just saw that it was evidence-based, it was more human-centric, and it was very value-driven. And I also reflected that this business that I was working for at the time, they were successful because they applied this way of working, not just to their product, but to the way that they ran the business itself, the way that they worked as teams. And I thought, oh, this we've got to know this, because we've got to support businesses like this as HR. And also we've got to start to apply this to our own products to get better results. So I started doing these meetups, and the first, once I'd done a few, Tracy came along with her team, and I met them, and it kind of just grew from there as a movement. And I was one of the first people to work with HR teams and leaders in this space. So I'm really fortunate, but that allowed me to build up this, bank of knowledge. And I put that into the first book, a couple of years ago. And then my publisher got in contact and said, we've been getting asked for something that really focuses on L&D. You know, would you be interested in this? I thought, yeah, there's actually some reasons why L&D need their own book. And one of them, I think, is just that there's so many of the big complex topics that we're trying to solve in organizations requires L&D and OD capability of some kind. And we've got to approach this in a new way. I also come from L&D, so it was a bit of a call out back to my old self. And also this is where I think a lot of agile transformation starts, not just for people teams, but for the wider organization. L&D often lead the way in agility, and I really felt like we needed our own playbook to help us achieve that outcome. Yeah, so that's sort of what's led me here today.
That resonates so much. I think also because of the timing, right? So there's you mentioned right at the beginning of the book, the macro changes that are happening right now almost puts L&D right in the pinnacle of this people challenge of upskilling and reskilling. And now more than ever, this feels like it's just landing at a perfect time too, right?
I think so, yeah. I also think that we underestimate, perhaps, maybe in the past, the people strategy and the importance of L&D when it comes to that. You know, ultimately there's this two-way contract where people sign up to organizations, you know, and they give their brain capacity, they give their best work, and okay, they want in return reward, but the next thing that they basically expect is career development and to feel like they're progressing and learning. And if they don't get that, they're quite quickly are going to leave. And so, and if you then put that next to skills gaps, you know, the need to kind of find new skills, upskill, reskill, digitalize, all of those big complex problems that we're facing, we've got to have L&D and OD capability in there. But I think we can't do it the way that we used to do it. I think we now need to apply, you know, a new business method to get the better outcomes. Yeah.
And we don't have the time, right? We don't have the time to go and do the traditional methods. Like it's got to be faster, experimental led, all the principles that you refer to as well. We're going to dive into the book, so I'm really excited. I don't want to ruin some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. 45 minutes is not enough to really get to the whole of the book. So we thought we'd talk about kind of three of the core areas today. But I thought before we do that, what would be maybe quite helpful, Natal, if you're happy to, is just give an overview of the 5 principles that you refer to in the book, and then
Sure.
we'll dive into 3 of them more detailed, if that's okay. So if you can give us maybe
Yeah.
an overview of kind of the 5 principles and what they are, and then we'll dive into the rest.
Yeah, definitely. So the book is based on 5 principles. And perhaps prior to saying what they are, the principles reflect a couple of things. One is Tracy Waters and her team, when I first met them, were applying design principles around how they were creating solutions. And it reflected not just their sort of new way of working, it reflected the type of product they were trying to create. So, for example, they wanted their products and solutions to be digitally enabled, that you could measure value from the word go. And if you couldn't measure it, they weren't going to release it. And then another team that I worked with that have now, and they are a case study in the book, have transformed their whole people function around agility. They were on a sort of quite a long journey, and the principles represented their new commitments in how they work as a team. And they had things like data-driven experimentation. You know, we work in a multifunctional, multi-skilled way. So I saw that there was a power around design principles, and if you are embarking on an agile journey, that these design principles would help you, not just in how you create solutions, but ultimately how you transform your team. So the 5 principles is, the first one is product led. This is about seeing the employee experience as your product. There's a couple of reasons why we want to see it as a product, but the most important is that it's all about understanding value. So products deliver value by solving problems for people. And so I'm sure we're going to get into that a bit today. The second one is human-centric design. So this is the sort of the philosophy that underpins design thinking. And I personally cannot separate design thinking from agility. I feel like it goes hand in hand, and particularly for L&D and OD topics, this is how you find out the problems to solve. You need to get into that lived experience and understand what are, how do you find the business challenge and know that you're delivering value. You do that by applying these kind of techniques. And then the third one is working as T-shaped people in T-shaped teams. So this is your team structure, but in particular, it's a modern way of actually developing our career, and it's a more skill-based way to building teams. Also, you can't solve complex problems, which is what agility is all about, unless you do it in a multi-skilled way. So that sort of links back to that first principle. The fourth principle is experimentation, and this is that you need to test, you need to get data, you need to understand, are you going to be able to fix this problem before you fully release your solution? And we're going to get a bit into that today. And of course, the fifth principle is delivering with impact. And this is putting it all together. It's embracing that agile cycle of continuous improvement, but it's understanding how to ruthlessly prioritize and particularly measure that impact that you're having as you start to design and deliver the solution across the organization. So that's the 5 principles.
Excellent. Thank you. Super. And I think for today, we decided we were going to dive into 3 of them, which was product-led, experimentation, and deliver with impact.
Yes.
So we're not going to dive into human-centered design or T-shaped people in T-shaped teams, 2 really cool topics. However, fear not. Natal mentioned earlier, I don't know if you were on the call or not, but she is joining us in London, and we're going to do a face-to-face session here on the 19th of July. So if you are about and love the session today and want to dive into it more and hear much more about the full breadth of the principles, then please do come and join us. The team will send you an email with the link in. I think there'll be a link at the end of the session today as well. And if you're not in London, I apologize because we are quite globally spread today, do buy the book, because the 5 principles are in the book and they're amazing. So it's June. It's in June. It's a couple of weeks time.
June the 19th. Yeah.
June the 19th. Making me question myself then. But yeah, please do come and join us. That would be great. Oh, sorry, I've clicked off my screen. Hold on a second. So let's dive into the first principle, and it is the first principle, which is product-led. My favourite one, and also as a product business, I think makes sense. We operate a product operating model here, which is about building great products that customers love and that's good for business. And I think almost when I read Agile L&D and I read the product operating model, they're the same thing, just applied to different industries. And so it's super exciting. It feels very connected. To be talking about this one. When I first read this first chapter, it makes me giggle right at the beginning, because you still refer to that practice that does still happen around happy sheets in learning and development, and how high scores on these happy sheets can lead to confusing them with value. So I really enjoyed the session today. That's great value. We've done a really good job. Well done, L&D. And we also see this. So we, as a tech business, a product business, helping deliver skills development in organizations, quite often we'll look at measuring impact and completion rates on a digital program we're seeing as well done, learning done, completed, without thinking about the value. So I really connected with this point right at the start. So I wanted to talk about the fact that you mentioned that product is defined as something that creates value for a group of people with a shared challenge or a problem, which in turn then creates value for the organization. So can you tell us a little bit more about what this means in the context of an L&D and the employee experience as well?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, I do have these, I think I mentioned earlier that I started my what is now a HR career in learning and development, but interesting enough, not in a HR team. It was in a business team, and then as a training consultant. So I used to go around the city of London at the time and deliver these training programs, primarily to financial institutions, and mainly around things like management development, influencing skills. And at the end of the program, I would hand out my happy sheet and I'd collect them all back in, and that was job done. I pretty much never saw these people again. And so I had no idea what really happened as a result of these training situations, which I just look back in horror at now. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. Like, so first, there's a shift that some people are maybe seeing in business where we're talking more about working product led. So it's actually an evolution of customer value and working customer led. And what it's
Mm.
saying is that if you want to know that you're actually delivering value to that customer, then you can't just sort of deliver what they expect or what you say you're going to do. You actually need to know what problem to solve for them, and so you need to kind of understand what value your product is going to bring. And this is how you sell a commercial product. So we don't just buy a phone. We buy a phone to connect to our children, our friends, our read our emails, watch a few TikTok videos, maybe lose our life on social media, whatever your thing. But the idea is that we want to do things with this product that we buy. And if we take that concept into learning and development and OD, then you're seeing the employee experience as the product. And there's a couple of things with that. Yes, it's made up of multiple component parts. So there's onboarding, career development, team development, performance, reward, even. The employees don't see that as different parts. They just, they experience it each day. So they don't separate getting paid from the learning program that they've just gone to. That's part of the whole experience for them. And so if we start seeing the employee experience as a product, first of all, we need to think about that whole life cycle. Okay, what's working well, what isn't? Where do we need to solve problems? Are we losing people after 2 years because they feel like they can't develop their career? Then and why? How do we keep them, or how do we move them on, or how do we get their skills, develop their skills? So you can kind of do a diagnostic of where your problem or what problems to solve. The other key thing is that when we start seeing it that way, we can start to measure and track value. And I think that's a big discussion in the L&D and people space. How do we truly demonstrate our impact? So our employee experience needs to help people get the job done, needs to make their working life easier. It needs to help them develop skills that they need to get the job done. It needs to help them, have a better negotiation with the client, or have a better conversation, or apply AI skills to innovate the product. So once we start to move into, okay, how are we solving problems for people, we not only better understand the actual solution design, we actually start to track the value. And for me, that is just so key. And the time and time again, even today I had a conversation around skills-based talent with a client, and we need to develop skills-based talent, and they're looking at the whole employee life cycle, and it's huge. But what was really interesting is once we distilled it into, all right, well, why would you do this for the company? What's the value? We started to have very different conversations, and we actually started to talk about, well, what we could do is we could target one strategic area of the business that either have, critical skills to the strategy, or they quickly need to digitalize to be able to innovate the product. Let's go and focus there, and let's get a model that's going to help them, develop skills, recruit for skills, and move people around based on skills. And then we've got something to measure. And then we've got a working model that we can start to scale out across the business. So it just helps you really become so much more targeted about what are you actually delivering and how do you measure what you're delivering. Yeah.
I think also I love the overview there. I think some of the things that we hear from customers, and I don't know if everybody else on the line has felt the same, but quite often the problems that you're facing in L&D feel really big. And like you said, you're kind of pulling it back to, we've got to move to a skills focused organization, or we've got to implement Gen AI, or we've got to solve this problem. They're massive. And actually, when you look at following the principles in Agile L&D, and you even start with this product-led one, the first thing it does is it just breaks it down into something that's small and bite-sized, and it helps you not kind of focus on the mountain, but think about, okay, what are the next best things that we can do that are going to help us to understand actually whether this is even a viable thing to be doing for the right audience and for the right set of people. So I think it's
Yes.
almost like a stress reliever, right? It takes it
It
into
is,
something
yeah.
that's much more manageable. I don't know if you get that feedback from people who've applied it before.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's, you know, so what is agility? Agility is about solving big complex problems.
Mm,
And now the world is full of big complex problems
yeah.
where the cause and effect is not clear. We haven't necessarily come across this problem before, or there's multiple ways of how to answer it. And I think, when you take AI, how do you get AI started in an organization? Whoa, it's huge. How do you develop the skills? Do you apply it in how you do recruitment or development? Do you actually just apply it to the product so people start to use it as they're doing their work? And so and that feels overwhelming. So definitely by thinking product led, you need to go, okay, there's a series of problems here to solve. Now let's think about what's going to have the biggest value. Where should we go first and why? Let's go and start there. And then we can apply some of the other principles, such as experimentation. Let's go and, test something and actually get some data on whether we can fix this problem or not. And then you start to actually get some focus. So does this work? Yes, no. If it doesn't, we don't have to sink too many more costs, and then we get data on what direction to go in. So for me, it's a way of actually it's actually taking the same philosophy that a business like yourself follows into how do you design the learning culture and product across your organization. And that's what I like. I think it's taking methods that are already proven elsewhere from business and applying it to our own space. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense, I feel.
And you mentioned people experience going, it's a critical, fundamental part of this product led piece. And in the book, you do the people experience life cycle and the diagrams that go with that. I think that's really helpful. I wonder if you could explain
Mm.
a bit about what that is and how somebody might pick it up and use it, or how does it form part of the product led principle?
Yeah, sure. I was going to say we should get a picture up. The
Got a led screen.
Yeah, I might try and find one. So the so I think so part of it is if you see what you're developing as a product, then we can apply a framework that I call the product development life cycle. Now, when you see it, it's quite similar to what you might see out there in other parts of the business in how they develop their products. But there's a couple of key points that I think are really crucial for L&D and people experience teams. And that's the second scoping. So what do I mean by that? So you start with the business challenge, and this might be, career development. It looks like we're losing people after 2 years.
Not gonna work, is it?
Yeah.
No, don't worry. I'll take a
I'll
screenshot and
find a
send
better
it.
picture soon. Um, it looks like we're developing, we're losing people after 2 years. What is going on? We've got an issue with career development. Okay. They're saying that in exit interviews, there's some evidence of people leaving the organization. Okay, let's spend time actually just with the business challenge. What's the value? What would happen to the business bottom line for the end customer and the employee if we actually went about solving this problem? At that stage, you don't know too much about how to solve it. And what I found with teams is we actually would then jump straight into the project and sometimes even straight into delivering a solution, which often in the past was, career competency frameworks or a series of learning programs or a new LMS. And what I'm saying is actually that's a separate step. Then go into what I call the research and discovery stage. And this is, you've got the vision, you know what value you want to deliver, but now we need to go and find out what's going on. And this is spending time with the people, applying things like personas and experience mapping, and really getting into that lived experience of work. And what out of that will come a series of problems to solve. So for career development, it might be that there's actually lots of opportunities, but they're not visible in the organization. Or people don't feel like they've got the skills to move to the next role. Okay. Or we need to help managers better develop people and help them develop people for new opportunities. But you won't be able to do them all in one go. You'll need to ruthlessly prioritize. So then by choosing one of place to start, you've now got your project. And this is when you scope. So now we return to our stakeholders and we say, okay, this is what we think the problem is. We've got some data around, how we could go about it. Now let's commit to a project to design the solution and run with that. So then we move into the kind of the co-creation and delivery. And then there's a final part, which I also think is really important, which is what happens to what you create. So a lot of L&D and people teams, we create great solutions, but then someone's got to look after them. We've either got to maintain them ourselves, or we give them to the people ops team, or we have to run them, every quarter, because now they involve new conversations for people to have, or we need to administer new learning. So quite up the front, you need to be already having conversations of what capacity does this require? How do you maintain it? Who owns it? Where does it go? And then you've got a process to actually tracking it and understanding, okay, when do we update it, or do we kill it after a period of time? Does it get replaced by something else? And so this is ultimately product management. And it's how we run our business, and it's really should be how we run our L&D and OD as well. I think too often we have created lots of sometimes quite admin heavy solutions, and then it's sort of added to the burden of BAU, and we can't go off and solve the next big problem, which is a real issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I think we've just been given a timer check, so I'll keep
Okay.
going.
Yeah.
So yeah, that the principle of
I'll
product
find the
led.
picture.
Yeah, find the picture. So moving on to it's actually the fourth principle, which is experimentation. And if we were to apply it to a world that from L&D we hear all the time, so we kind of don't go one single day at the moment without someone saying Gen AI, and how do we use this technology? And using this technology must come with experimentation. So what does experimentation look like in practice, and what's the best way to get the most out of it?
Sure. So experimentation really is about risk management. So, and I know a lot of people feel that it sounds risky when you use the term experimentation and quite hesitant around it, but actually it's about reframing it, because it's the only way to know that you're going in the right direction. And it goes back to that need to solve complex problems. So with complex problems, there's multiple ways to solve them. And often just by doing one thing, you start to change the nature of the problem itself. And we've all seen that, by introducing a learning program, you actually start to change what's happening in the business. So you need a way to understand, before you fully release, is this going to work? Is this going to solve the problem? And it's about bringing that back down to a hypothesis. What's the hypothesis that we can actually go and change behavior or increase performance? And so I think for me, it might sound, if you haven't done experimentation before, it might sound risky, but actually it's about managing risk and knowing that you can have some data to then make decisions. And what's interesting is I find that if you use that kind of language with your stakeholders, you don't really say, oh, I'm going to work in an agile way and I'm going to, go off and run lots of experiments. You say, oh, can you work with me we want to get some data to know that what we then invest in the project that we run is the right thing to do. So let's run some very, short, safe experiments to actually test some key hypotheses that we have at the moment. And if you talk in that way, I find that people really want to be part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And the word that you talk about not talking about is pilot. So moving away
Yes.
from pilot and into experimentation. And the link to that is about failing fast, right? And the fear of what that is. So we often talk about failing fast, but have you got experience? It's quite for L&D, I think there's a level of risk around it. If I go and deliver something, particularly if you're thinking about, I remember the Tracy Waters example as a senior exec learning initiative. You go and experiment and fail fast on that audience, the impact's quite scary. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the reasons people back off and fear this and then revert back to doing 2-day large offsites. Everyone's happy because they've got together and the happy sheets tell you they love networking and the food was great. But did you deliver value? So Can you talk us through some of the examples of failing fast and why not to fear it, and how to re-engage that audience again in those kind of scenarios?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's an interesting one. So I like to frame it as fail cheaply as well as
Yeah,
fail quickly.
yeah,
And so the difference between a pilot and an experiment is ultimately, can you fail? And I always remember one that I did quite early on in my it's entry into agility, which was helping an organization redesign performance and reward. And I gave, we ran a series of experiments around what happens if you remove ratings, what happens if you introduce 360 feedback. And to certain teams, I gave them a feedback app to help them give each other feedback, and I thought, oh, they're going to love it. So it had an app on their phone, and they're techie, they're young, they're going to love this, and guess what? They hated it and said, "Oh, we don't need an app. We need a psychologically safe space to give each other feedback." And what came out of that is that they needed the discussions to be about career and actual performance feedback, not about numbers and ratings at the time. So well, for me, because I introduced that as an experiment. I hadn't signed big vendor agreements. I had negotiated to use this particular app for just a set period of time. I actually just stopped it there and went, okay, that's fine. We've actually learned a lot from this, and we now know what direction to go in our project. And we can introduce some tech a bit later that might help, but we need to solve these other problems first. And I think that's what's so key is can you fail? When I started, running big learning programs myself, I used to, I'd gather all these needs analysis, but then I'd design a big program. And then I'd have, the first session, I'd have the CEO in the room. I've signed a big vendor agreement. Everyone's got their programs in their diary, I can't really fail. And so even if it doesn't go as well as I hoped, I can only tweak it now. I can't really go and just cancel it from everyone's diary. So how do you break it down, and how do you know that you've got some data that by the time it is in people's diaries, it's going to be a success? And I think, there's one example in the book, which is about designing a executive leadership program. And what I think is important about that is there's a whole series of sort of, guardrails and gates that they had to go through in the project to know that this was the right direction. But the start of it was actually that they just sketched up 5 examples of a possible leadership program and took that to some senior leaders. At that stage, senior leaders know that this is just sketching, this is just, but they told, they were very adamant what they wanted and what they didn't want. And from that, they got some 4 design principles to then go and start designing this program. And the first sort of cohort was only 9 leaders. And so they kept it very small. And by then they'd already done some key testing around it. And but by the time that then ran, they were about, I think they were midway through that first round, it was proving to be a big success. So in the background, they started to set up, okay, how do we start to scale this? Because it looks like we want hundreds of people to potentially go through this. And I spoke to them recently, and that's where it's now. There's hundreds of people. So you can start very basic and have some, literally just proof of concept to begin with. And only if you get the right sort of messages do you keep moving forward. Otherwise, you stop and you haven't sunk too many costs yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Fail cheap and fail fast.
Fail cheap and fail fast. Exactly.
I also like Danny Seals in the book refers to try not to backwards prove your hypothesis as well. So don't run at something and then backwards try and prove it. Like write it up
Totally.
front. I quite like
Well,
that
I do
principle.
work with a lot of teams that they want to prove their hypothesis correct. And
Yeah.
actually a hypothesis is about, by working this way, we want to see if hybrid teams are still productive. Okay, so our hypothesis is if this hybrid team works in this particular way, over this period of time, they will be productive. You can't, then you go and look at the data. And actually, sometimes you're even more interested in the teams that weren't productive. What happened and why and what's going on. So be more the scientist and go and interrogate the data, both directions. Don't just try and go and prove, your gut feeling correct.
Yeah. And so then moving to the last principle, which is delivering with impact. This is flying by.
I know.
So when we spoke actually before, whilst you were writing your book, we talked about this principle as well in terms of at Hive, we talk about marginal gains. So we've been through our own transformation this year, and part of that transformation is just about moving forward with marginal gains, not about boiling the ocean, trying to hit big numbers as a team, both from in all areas of the business actually. But like we just kept talking about marginal gains throughout the year, and as long as we're moving forward, and we can see those marginal gains, then the transformation is moving in the right direction. So can you talk a bit more about what deliver with impact and not experimentation, deliver with impact looks like in practice?
For sure. Well, I also loved in your interview for the book where you talked about the marginal gains. And in particular, you talked about agility being a number of things. One, it was a mindset. And so this is embracing a cycle of what I call plan, do, review, adapt. And so where you've got your long-term vision, you've got your strategy, you've got the problems to solve, but how do you know on that shorter cycle you're delivering the right things that's going to keep leading in that direction and solving those problems? And that's a real mindset to embrace that. You also talked about that you apply it to your product, which I thought was so key. So how do you know that you've got data that your product is fixing the problems that your clients need to solve? And what's the evidence of success? And how do you get that on a smaller scale before you fully release across their business? But you then also talked about that it was a way of building teams and also running a business. And I find that so interesting because I think if we take that into our work, how do we use the agile cycle to understand, to break down big complex problems in the workplace, hybrid, working, well-being, developing leaders of tomorrow? How do we break that down into smaller, more manageable chunks of work? But then on that regular basis, how do we know that what we're doing is giving us the data that, yep, we're definitely leading in the right direction? How do we continuously improve that and, tweak that product? But also, how do we then help the wider business work that way? And I think that's the thing. There's a dual thing here for L&D and people teams is how do we understand that we're delivering impact with the solutions that we create, but also how do we help the business deliver that impact and deliver value through to the end customer? So it helps us understand where we sit in that value stream as well. But definitely, because going back, it's a link back to that product led. So, to understand the impact, you need to know the problem you're solving. So it can be as simple as even learning certain skills. So I find talking about something like learning communication skills quite problematic because what does that mean? It needs to equal an outcome. So does this person need to go and answer a series of hard questions in a negotiation? Does this person need to go and steer a board meeting? What is the outcome of learning these communication skills? And once we start focusing on that outcome, we can measure it and we can actually design solutions to change that outcome. So it really comes back to what's the problem to solve and what's the value and how do you measure it? And so it's trying to put it all together.
Yeah, I like that. You plan, do, review, and adapt, and how you kind of then fix all the metrics around it as well. You also talk about lining up the value effort matrix, which I think is a really good framework for people to thinking about in terms of when to prioritize and when not to.
Yeah, definitely. I talk about, it's quite easy to go out and identify all these business challenges and things to do. What's really hard is deciding where to focus your time and energy, and the value and effort matrix I just find so important in that step. You can't do it all, but you also need a way to have conversations with business leaders and and teams around why you're focusing on one thing now and maybe something else next, that's because you've got the evidence that that's going to have a bigger impact on the business bottom line, or the value that you're delivering. So it also gives you a bit of a language to make some of those trade-offs, I think, in business, which is very important, because you don't want to be seen as a team that says, no, we're busy doing this. It's just, no, not now, because we're making an impact in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can hear from all the examples that you've given how multi-skilled an L&D team needs to be able to deliver on this. And I think, although I know we're not touching into T-shaped people and T-shaped teams and that side of things, I think it does sort of lean into actually how multifaceted, multi-skilled L&D need to be to think about shifting into more of an agile way of working as well.
Yeah. I think someone in one of their interviews for the book said, there's a danger when we look at a business problem, if we just look at it from what certain silos. So you will go, okay, well, I can think of the e-learning solution here, but then someone else will think of the management development solution. Someone else might think of the recruitment solution or the talent solution. And actually, it probably requires elements from all of those skill sets. So it is, it equals a new delivery model that sits behind being able to deliver that value in the organization. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Nadal. It was absolutely fantastic. I just wanted to check before we summarise. We've got our book winners to announce. We've got a few updates to share with everybody. We just want to check if anyone had any questions for Natal. Give everyone a couple of seconds. They've been quite shy so far. If not, we can move on to the book winners.
Why don't we do the book winners and we'll see if a question comes through. I found the product development life cycle as well, so we can show that.
Yeah, if you can share that, that'd be great. Cool. So, oh, here we go. You show this. What's it?
There we go.
Fantastic. There's the 5 steps there. I love this model. We use it when we're kind of working alongside customers when we're thinking about designing and delivering new programs together. And it's incredibly helpful and means that we can work in partnership more than there's a solution to deliver now turn up as a vendor and deliver it. So being able to use these principles is actually really exciting as a business to be able to work alongside customers. And we feel part of the team, the multifaceted team. The vendor should become part of that multi-skilled team, I think,
yes,
to be able to help deliver those results as well. So this is cool. Thank you.
No, I really like that. Such a data evidence-based way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And Natal, would you like to announce the winners for the book? Would you like me to?
I'll do one. So the first winner is Jenny. Jenny, is it Perot? Would that be the Perot? I'm not sure if the T's are pronounceable, but you now have a book.
Good, cool. And the second winner, book flying over its way to you, is Tamsin Wilson. Congratulations, Tamsin. So Jenny Perrott and Tamsin Wilson. You have a book winging its way to you. Fantastic.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Oh, we've got some questions coming in. So I'll read them out for you, Natal. So what company is a good example for you in L&D? Is the first question.
Hive. No, I think you're a great example. You know, with I loved looking at the examples of how you develop your product with your clients. You don't lay big bets, you know, up front. You look at, okay, what are the problems to solve? How do we set up some small experiments to test that this is going to be the right approach? And once you've got data, then you start to scale. And I think that's so key. I think particularly with digital learning, there's a danger that we just buy things off the shelf and release them into the business without thinking about how do we really shift performance and change behavior. So I think it's a great example, and I really love that you run your teams in that T-shaped way, and you saw the need to bring that multi-skilled team together to deliver a better product, rather than doing it in your sort of the kind of topic or skill silos. So I think you're a great example of it. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. We're trying. We definitely failed fast on a lot of things too, which is part of the model. So that's all okay. And then a second question here is, oh, where did it go? Natal, how do you think the business is reacting to this new L&D model for the companies you've worked with?
Yeah, look, I think that, and I say this, quite a lot, is that I don't make it about the model. I make it about the business challenge and what you're trying to solve with the business or the business leaders. And if you use that terminology, it then they're not scared about a new model. What they're actually and generally they want to be part of it. So if you're talking about, oh, we've got a problem with career development, we're losing people after 2 years, people feel like they can't develop and progress their career in our organization. What are we going to do about it? Then they quickly want to be involved. They want to be involved in running a short experiment. They want to be involved in getting some more data. They want to solve it, and they often give their time. And so I think if you can do it that way and talk more about the hypothesis and the data you need to collect, and less about the model that you're following, I think it can be really engaging, but also you quickly see results, and yeah, that's what's key. Yeah.
Excellent. And then one here, which is departments that were positioned as SME in the past are now part of the team. What do you think about them embracing this?
Yeah. So I think, so for me, it is about building, so there's a couple of things. One is, what is the T-shaped team that you need to be able to deliver solutions across a whole spectrum of topics and business challenges? But also, yeah, how does people that have certain skills or certain knowledge, how do you engage them? And I don't think they have to be in the team permanently all the time, but you might want them to be in certain sprints around the product, or you might want them to be user testers, or you might want them to be people that are, in that research and discovery stage before you go and, fully scope the subsequent project. So I think you can be strategic about how you involve them. You might not be able to take 100% of their time, but the more we start to see an L&D team as a collection of T-shaped skills, so that's digital and marketing and product design, as much as learning and facilitation, and management development, I think the more we start to see that our skill set it evolves, I think that the healthier, the better. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that massively. That's great. Just before everybody jumps off, I just want to remind you that this book, which I can't show you, is amazing. And look down here. Oh my God, I've got my screen on the wrong way. Down in the box, the opposite way, is the link to the book. So please do. I promise you, it's like a workbook that you'll come back to and get tons of use out of. Lots of great insight in there. And if you really enjoyed listening to some of the areas of the book today, then do come and visit us in London on the 19th of June. We're hosting here in Scale Space, which is in White City in London, and the details are in the box too. We can also they'll be on our LinkedIn profiles and the website too. But I want to say a huge thank you to Natal. Absolutely loved having you here today. I'm still writing notes after reading the book multiple times, speaking to you lots of times. I've still got my book and I'm still writing notes. So it's always a learning journey working and discussing things with you, Natal. So huge thank you for sharing with everyone today. And look forward to our next session where we dive into human-centered design and T-shaped people in T-shaped teams in a bit more detail. And thank you,
Thanks
everybody,
for having
for joining
me,
us.
and I hope to see people in London. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.